Hello there, friends of AI for Autism, and welcome back as we continue with our series of interviews where we hear from members of our community and listen to their stories. We have an awesome guest with us today. Niki is an autistic mum and wife, originally from Oregon in the US, and more recently hailing from Orlando, Florida. Niki is a mother of two sons, Charlie and Oliver, and Niki also runs the wonderful YouTube channel, The Awesome With Autism Show, where she posts regular content. And today we'll be hearing Niki's story and we'll get a chance to learn from her experiences. So please welcome Niki Awesome. Hi Niki, how's it going?
Hello everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. Niki, I hear there's a storm going on where you are at the moment right now. How are things?
It's not too bad. It just started. It rains pretty heavily out here in Florida, specifically the Orlando area, but it rains every day like this. So
Wow.
You kind of have to, it's hit or miss whether or not you can get outside. So always carry an umbrella.
That's amazing. It wasn't Storm Elsa, is it? Is that still there or has it moved?
Elsa has passed on, and I actually posted an episode on the YouTube channel for the show, and we didn't get hit very hard at all. We got a lot of rain, not as much wind here, but we did get a lot of rain, a lot of thunder and lightning, but it did pass overnight while everyone was sleeping.
Brilliant.
And even like the tornado warnings were downgraded slowly through the night, so I was able to kind of breathe and get some rest. So I actually slept through it.
Well, that's good to hear. Well, I'm glad to hear that everyone's safe and sound. And also I'm glad to know that the internet connection is fairly stable. So I'm glad that we can have this interview here. So Niki, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how old you were when you were diagnosed as autistic?
Oh, sure. So whenever anybody asks me this question, I always wonder where I should start. But I'll start with where I was diagnosed. And I was diagnosed actually at the age of 37. So that was 2 years ago. I'm 39 and I'll be 40 in about 5 months. Yay. So I was diagnosed at 37, and that actually came about through years of therapy that I had already been doing, just to improve myself and to, I guess, improve my relationships with everybody and anybody, and to basically like rewire the toxicity that I was raised around and that I had gotten myself into in previous relationships. And those relationships were long-term relationships. I'm not the type of person who dates. I don't like dating and hopping from one person to the next. So when I stay in a long-term relationship, I guess you could say, I took it quite literally, to the point where anything abusive or toxic, I was just putting up with, because I was taught growing up that you stay in a long-term relationship and that's it. When you move in together, you're supposed to stay with that person. And, you know, if you have children, you stay with that person no matter what. And I began to see the light, as they say. Once I had moved away from toxic relationships in my hometown, which I was actually born and raised in California, and then later on down the road moved to Oregon. But after seeing that and getting help for myself and really like going through my history and how I was raised and rewiring my patterns and my associations that I was making, through that, my therapist was like, you know, you've got some traits here that are happening, because of the way that I would describe feelings. I have alexithymia, where I cannot identify what I'm feeling. And if my body is giving physical signs of distress, I won't make the association that it's emotional distress. I'll just think, oh, okay, I'm hot, I'm going to take my jacket off, or, you know, very, very basic. So that started coming about. And then interoception was also brought into the picture of not knowing when I'm thirsty or when I'm hungry, because sometimes I will go for a couple days without drinking water. at all, which, you know, a personal medical note, I as a result, I have kidney stones from not drinking enough water. I'll do athletic events and I'll pass out at the end of an athletic event because I didn't know that I needed to drink or eat more. I used to be a marathon runner. When when I got divorced years back, about 6 or 7 years ago, I think, I would run marathons to work off whatever it was that I was feeling, because I thought, oh, okay, well, the marathons are really helping me and running is really helping. I feel like I can think clearer as to what I need to do for the day, like my tasks, but I wasn't thinking about my feelings at all and my emotional state. It was just, okay, I can think clearer and get my chores done or whatever. So with that, I lost a lot of weight because I wasn't eating or drinking enough, and I did not know that it was interoceptive and alexithymic issues that were involved until I met my therapist. So it was through that, and then you know, she gave me an assessment, and I'm more like Elon, like Asperger's as they used to formerly call it, but she mentioned a trick that I was doing that I had no idea that I was actually doing. And that is in regards to eye contact. And she said, you know, you're not looking at me in the eye when I'm talking to you. And I was like, how do you know? And she's like, you're looking here or you're looking here, but you're not looking here. And when people talk to me directly, I'll keep looking a different direction, but I'll still hear them and I'll respond, but it's easy. I can actually respond with a clearer response and a more precise response if I'm not looking at somebody directly. But I had no idea that I had cheat codes for that. So yes, through that's how that happened. And let's see, my career history, I actually spent, I think it's 13 plus years in the emergency and medical fields, emergency response, disaster response, those fields there. And that actually started out with the American Red Cross. I actually traveled abroad as well to get more work experience. Traveled to Nepal, and this was all by myself. I was going on my own. Nepal was the most memorable. I actually founded a small nonprofit, an orphanage out there, and yeah, with 2 locals, passed it on to them. It's no longer in my name, everybody. It's all them now. So they've got their orphanage.
But
yes, go ahead.
the fact that you established it is truly amazing. So I want to interrupt you just to say that that's
Sure.
absolutely amazing. So hats
Thank
off
you.
to you there. So please continue.
Oh yes, and that actually resulted because I was doing some teaching work out there, and then 2 locals from the small town of Bandipur approached me about starting an orphanage, and you know, I rehabbed the library there. I really want to go back, and I want to see, you know, how everything is doing, and you know, if they need more work done and more painting and things like that, because the library there was done or is in the style. I feel so bad for not knowing this, but it's really been like 9 years since I've been there. It was done in a very traditional style of the culture in Bandipur, and it was starting to fall apart. It really needed to be rehabbed, and so got a group of locals together and started buying materials out of pocket, and just was like, you know what, let's paint and let's fix the books and let's make sure the kids can read safely and organize everything so that they can see the information. Yeah, and apparently ever since, the kids have been enjoying that library, the way that it was set up and what have you. I do take a look online to see if anybody's traveled there and to take a look at the library. So it makes me proud to see it, you know, all nice and clean and organized, and seeing everybody using it. So yeah, so world travel is on the list. And then I guess I'm still a traveler. Both my husband now and I, we not really renegades of sorts. I don't know, maybe. We are the type of individuals who can pick up and go to a different part of the world and still be successful and establish ourselves and get on and be independent and things like that. But right now I had a recent career change from the medical field. The medical field is hospitality in a sense that I'm there for people in their worst times in life. I was an EMT, I was a 911 EMT in California for the longest time. And it can be very traumatizing seeing some of the things that you do. And that in combination with the toxicity that I had grown up with, it was just really pressing on me personally. And so I said, well, you know, I'd much rather be on the other end of the hospitality spectrum and be there for people's celebratory moments. So I switched careers very recently, and now I work for a very famous mouse who likes theme parks and cartoons. So yes, which I will announce that on the YouTube channels soon because of the content that's on there. I do need to formally announce it. So yeah, so now I'm in that side of hospitality, and it's just wonderful. I grew up with that all my life. My first memories were with that and with my dad. So for me, I feel like I'm at home when I'm doing that. And then on the side, I have the Awesome With Autism Show, which I started because of therapy. I wanted to practice processing my thoughts and getting them out verbally, hopefully in a clear way when I'm filming. And at first, I mean, I would edit out so much stuff, so much content, because I just thought, oh, people don't want to see this, or, you know, my speech is not clear. I don't think I'm getting my message through. Maybe I'm rambling like I am now.
Yeah. In fact, if I may add to that, one of the things about these interviews is we don't edit them. We film them raw, okay. And when the time comes, we upload them, because there's a level of authenticity that we want. And I'm sure there's awesome. A level of authenticity that you discovered after initially editing and then realized, hang on, here's a real me.
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what happened. I was thinking about it more, and I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to leave this stuff in without it being too long. I mean, I don't want these things, honestly, when I'm out filming, I get like 2 or 3 hours of content, and I'm like, no, they're not going to watch this. So there's obviously some editing that needs to be done. Yeah. And then of course there's the editing that's done for comedic relief. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I will leave things in to show people that, you know, with autism and with the way the mind is thinking, when you've got so much sensory input happening, how it can be so disruptive and how it can be debilitating at times, which is something I have yet to put on the show. And is that, you know, like my most recent live show or live stream was being at the park in a huge crowd. It was very humid. It was sprinkling too, which I can't. That bothers me when it touches my skin, because I'll just constantly want to scratch and itch. But being with so much sensory overload, what people haven't seen yet is that I go home, and I've got my weighted blanket on me right now. I go home, I crawl into bed, I got my weighted blanket on, and I'm asleep for sometimes 8-9 hours. And in fact, the other day, that's what happened. Was I had so much sensory overload from the past 2 days, and I did not have time to give myself the rest that I needed, that I got up and I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to start my day. And, you know, this is the day that my husband was home too. And then I said, all right, I'm going to crawl back into bed and just hang out. We're going to have breakfast. I fell asleep for like another 9.5 hours. And I had no idea that I was that exhausted. So it's things like that that people don't see. Or for example, you know, with that fireworks show, in the very beginning, I think I caught myself. I was actually touching my husband's elbows. He has really soft elbows. So like here and here, you might see me doing that to him often. And that's also just a sensory regulation thing that I tend to do. And sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing these things because I'm so just off, or I've got so much going on that I'm just kind of in like a survival mode until I can get from point A to point B, that I don't realize that I'm flapping, or I don't realize that I'm swaying back and forth or doing the tics that I have. So it's those things that it's difficult to capture on film when I'm holding the camera. So hopefully one of these days, Patrick, my husband, Patrick Awesome, will want to film and do some of that, or I can just put it on a stand. I don't know. It's kind of awkward, but yeah, yeah. We'll see how it goes.
Well, you know, it'll be great at some point to even interview Patrick and what it's like being your husband and the father to
Yes.
children too. And
Yes.
then you've mentioned in a previous phone conversation and also message you mentioned him, and it'll be lovely to talk to him at some point. This is fascinating what you said about the energy after having expelled it in doing activities like filming. In an earlier interview with someone, with Ruth, she was mentioning about the spoons and the 12 spoons concept, whereby
Yes.
for what would be considered an ordinary task for someone who's neurotypical, it's like an expulsion of energy for someone who might be more neurodiverse, for lack of a better term. So it's interesting when you share that and how your experience correlates with many other experiences of people. It might be something is involves talking to people, whether it's driving the car or anything at all.
Yes, yes. And I have noticed that as I grow older chronologically, internally, I'll never age. But as I do grow older, I have noticed that the need to take more rest just becomes more necessary. Because then it's like I can't think straight. I can't process information that I need to process. So if I'm overloaded and Charlie needs my attention because he needs me to try to help him fix a toy, or he wants me to help him with something on Minecraft, I feel like I cannot think straight. If I've got this sensory overload, I'm just so exhausted. It's like, I think the best way that I can put it is, if you've got an outlet in the wall, right? And you overload that outlet with too much required power, and that outlet, the switch will just shut off. Like, nope, can't do it anymore. And it's not that it doesn't work permanently. It's like, no, there's just too much input. You need to remove some of those plugs, and then you can turn the switch back on, and then it'll work as intended. That's what I feel like. Sometimes I short circuit, or you know, I'll joke about it. I'll say, oh, you know what, I'm still running on DOS. Sorry, C:\\. So so some people understand it, and you know, if the younger generations understand it, I'm like, oh wow, so you're computer science, aren't you?
Yeah. Because I think nowadays everything's the buttons there, you tap it, no need to go into the command or anything like that.
Exactly. No keyboards at all.
Yeah.
Just talk.
Yeah, and for anyone at home who didn't understand what we're talking about, that's absolutely fine. I'm sure you got the gist of what was being said.
Yes.
Now, I know you've mentioned some things, that there were some questions that I had to explore some of the things that you shared, and I hope you don't mind us revisiting some of the things that you've said in the last few minutes. Sure. So I'd like to, and feel free to share whatever you feel comfortable sharing, please. So after discovering that you were autistic and what that meant, how did you feel and how did you see yourself change as a person? I mean, did you suddenly, things of the past suddenly make sense? Do you have better clarity? Feel free to elaborate.
Yeah. When I received, it was an overload, an emotional overload for me. And that's something that happens often with me, where not just a sensory overload, but with an emotional overload, it gets so overwhelming that I can't speak.
Wow.
And I can't, in that moment, I can't tell you what is happening with me and internally and what's going on. I usually have to say, no, what, just leave me alone. Just don't look at me, just leave me alone. I just need to let this pass, and then I can process the information. And so when I realized that, I went into this crying craze, just like, I think of every emotion under the sun, pretty much. We have this joke of rainbows shooting out of my ears whenever I feel overloaded. And, my husband will always send me a meme of like a unicorn or of SpongeBob with the rainbows coming out of all of the little holes in the sponge. Yeah. So that's basically the analogy that I have for that. I felt quite a bit of relief with that, because it did explain my entire life. I did so much masking growing up, and to this day, I still find myself masking. Like, I'm still trying to remove those ingrained layers that I don't want and never wanted, in order to just be myself and to be comfortable with that. And day by day, it's slowly coming out where, even in my workspace, and even when I am at the parks, and I do start stimming, or I'll start stuttering, or I'll just suddenly leave because it's too overwhelming. Most of the time, I don't receive any flack for that. Like, even with my coworkers, they try to understand more, or they just say, "Oh, okay, really?" And they don't think anything of it. They just think, "Oh, okay, it's who she is. That's fine." I haven't been discriminated against because of that. Even my bosses, they're like, "Wow, that's really fascinating. We'd like to know more, actually." And I'm like, "Oh, great, cool." And I think down the road, more and more, it even explained the beginnings of Patrick and my relationship, because we met in 2014, so obviously that was way before my diagnosis, and it explained a lot of my mood swings, and it explained a lot of my thought processes as to why I would do things in a certain way, or why the dishwasher, the forks and the spoons, just don't mix them, put them together. And the reason why is because when you take them all out at once, they're easier to put away. Like, it's these thought processes that would confuse him so much, because they were so minuscule and minor, and they're a non-issue basically, but for my mind they are an issue. And the reason being is because, in order for me to visually see the information that's in that dishwasher, for example, it has to be organized, because I'm processing so much information that, in order to reduce the anxiety and in order to be able to participate and to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to put the dishes away, and not, oh my gosh, this is too much, I need to step away and go underneath my weighted blanket again. It's got to be organized. And that's something that's very common with autistic people, is things need to be, neat and organized in order for us to process that information, because it's too much. And I do find that I'm constantly processing information. It doesn't stop. I will remember things from days, even years ago, patterns, for example, patterns in society, the ways in which society is ebbing and flowing, and the behavioral direction that, mass-mindedness is one of my hyper focuses. I studied it all throughout college. Yeah. And so seeing those patterns from the minute to the extraordinary. I don't stop processing information, and it can actually cause a lot of anxiety for me because I will see things. I'm one of those people that sees things before others see it, and then it happens, and then everybody else is like, oh my gosh, why is this happening? And I'm like, well, it's because of A, B, C, D. I'll just go down the list. Like, no, this is why. These are the patterns, and there were markers leading up to this, and that's why it happened. And it's not even because I want to be paying attention to these things. It just happens. And so I think too, where that information on top of so much visual stimuli, so much auditory stimuli, it's so exhausting, which is why sometimes I will come home and I'll sleep for 14 hours straight in the middle of the day. So there are some moments where I think I do have anger and resentment, but at the same time, that resentment is a behavioral pattern that was ingrained when I was young because of the cultural standards of the time. Whereas, even the past 10, 15 years into now, you have this YOLO, you only live once, where the younger generations don't care about the past, they don't care about the future, they just care about the right here and right now, which that can also be dangerous as well for your mental health and your emotional health. So there, again, there's a lot of layers that I had to remove and that I'm still removing. But I am very, very happy about receiving that diagnosis. And it was just like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Not to say that it's an excuse for behavior, but it's an explanation for behavior and the way this DOS computer is operating.
That's absolutely wonderful. And thank you for being open and vulnerable to share all this with us. The next question kind of touches on what followed after that. And as I said, please feel free to explore and go as far as you want when it comes to sharing. How were family and friends towards you after discovering you were autistic? And what was support like from them, from services, from colleagues, etc.?
Sure. So my family is very mixed. There's some that I have not told because I do know that the response would not be a good one. And I know that there wouldn't be a point in saying anything because it would just lead to turmoil, and emotional distress. So for me, I think when I do tell people, it's just like matter of fact, but I don't look to it to receive like justification from other people or validity from other people. I validate myself. And so the reason why I wouldn't tell some people is because of their personality type that I'm already familiar with. And it's like, I just don't feel like dealing with that. So I'm not going to. There's no point. Whereas some family that I have told are because their children or their grandchildren, or, I do have other family members who actually have official diagnoses from nonverbal up to me, for example, who are autistic. So it is in our family, quite a few individuals. And even we do question at least one individual who has since passed, who might have also been on the spectrum, but the knowledge and resources were not there for her time, as well as for her parents. So, but we do suspect that she might have been on the spectrum. So I have had some individuals who were just like, oh, wow, that's really fascinating. And they're kind of like, really? Because they are confused, because based off of the other individuals in my family who are autistic, they think that only that represents autism.
Right.
And those traits represent autism. So then when I explain to them, well, you've got A, B, C, and D, that's also part of the spectrum. It's, neurological, that they're like, oh, okay. And so very recently with some cousins, very young cousins, I was actually visiting family, and I had noticed that one of them was having difficulty doing his homework. And so I thought, I'm going to try something. And I started setting timers because he would get distracted, or maybe the information was not being presented in a way in which it would capture his attention. And so I said, all right, well, instead of sitting there saying, hey, do your homework, do your homework, do your homework for another 45 minutes for this project that should take 10 minutes, I said, I'm going to set a 10-minute timer. And I would say, okay, you ready? Let's go. And he did it in less than the 10 minutes. He got it done.
Brilliant.
And so it was putting into perspective the concept of time for him. And then what I would do in between was I would say, okay, let's take a break. You have a choice for the next 5 minutes. You have a choice of what you want to do with your 5-minute break, but I'm going to set another timer. So he needed that auditory stimuli to remind him and to keep him on track. And what he ended up doing was, rather than going and playing, he ended up taking all of his markers, huge table, took all of his markers, all of his crayons, all of his erasers, and he started organizing them by color and lining them up in his holders, and even the erasers by size and by, the texture and the type. And I was like, okay, so what he's doing right now is he's doing an activity that's going to take his brain from doing that cognitive and that academic task of having to think. And now instead, he's going to do something that seems mindless. It's just a mindless activity of just organizing. He's calming himself down. And that's what he likes to do. And I was like, all right, so this is how he regulates himself. He's self-regulating in this way. And so it's these things that I started talking about with his parents and his grandparents. And I was just like, these are things that you might want to look into, because it may seem like it is not important to you, but this is something that he is actually doing for his mind and for his well-being. And so it may not make sense, but please look into it, read some books. And I would explain things about myself that were kind of similar, and how I process information and what I need to do to regulate anything that I'm overloaded with in order to keep my momentum going and to keep from falling asleep on the couch for another 10 hours. So yeah, and then there were some people who just flat out denied it, who would just say, oh no, you're not. I don't believe that you are. And so for me, I was just like, okay, that is your belief system. This is not a belief for me. This is an actual thing. This is a fact. This is a fact and my truth. And so for those individuals, I move on very quickly. I don't put up with the whole lot, not in my older years, because I think it has a lot to do also with my husband being type 1 diabetic. I just don't have time to argue and to prove myself to others that it's just not going to get through. That's not on me. If they want to believe what they want to believe, then okay. But it's not going to change my existence. It's not going to change my reality or my truth. So when that happens, I know where I need to part ways. And it happens very quickly, which is also something that autistics tend to do. We tend to cut people off very quickly if it doesn't make sense. if it's not logical, if it doesn't make sense, okay, we're going to move on because I've got this task, or whatever it is that I need to do. I've got my focus. I'm going to go and do it. And that in and of itself can seem very cold to a lot of people, a lot of neurotypical people, that can seem emotionally cold, or as though we are bipolar. And it's far from it. I think people get that confused as the differences between the autistic mind and how we're going to continue to proceed through life versus the bipolar person and that neurological issue. So I could go on and on about this.
No,
But
that would be lovely, and I am conscious of time on your end too. I don't know how much time you're available for the rest of the interview, but I'm happy to go on continuing for ages and ages and ages. So thank you. But what you said about your nephew was really touching, and I think your nephew is really blessed to have an auntie such as yourself to be able to look out for him and to recognize these things and to make family members aware of it too. But was that, well, it was only 2 years since when you discovered
yes,
your autism.
yes.
So what were the challenges that you faced as you were growing up, and up until more recently, some of the things you would be willing to share?
Right. So a lot of my challenges were sensory and social. And then communication came as a result of that.
Mhm.
And in my younger years, very particular about food. I was made to eat chicken, for example, quite often, and the texture would make me gag. So I would literally just drown it in like soy sauce or barbecue sauce or ketchup or whatever, because my parents were like, no, you have to eat this. If you don't eat it, then you don't get up from the table, for example. It's very common back then. And so I would just bury it in these sauces. But well, over time, my parents were like, no, you're not using that much sauce. That's a ridiculous amount of sauce. And I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, I'll eat it, but I would find ways to regulate the sensory overload and the taste and the texture of it by drinking a lot of juice. Or what I would ask for is a cup just full of ice, and I would eat a piece of chicken and then I would chew on something crunchy, because the sound and the crunch kind of dampened my gag reflex, and it would help rebalance everything. I had no idea that had anything to do with being autistic at all. I just thought what my parents and what all the adults thought was, oh, she's just a picky eater. And in actuality, aside from that, but also the misophonia that I had no idea had a lot to do with my food issues and my food aversions.
Sorry to interrupt you, Niki. Could you tell us a bit more for the benefit of those at home who might not be familiar? What is misophonia?
Oh, yes. So misophonia, my misophonia, for example, when I hear certain sounds, it actually changes the way food tastes when I'm eating. And it's a slight delay. So I'll be eating, and if I hear slurping, it doesn't happen right away. It's usually a few seconds later where all of a sudden the food just tastes differently and I have to stop eating. So misophonia also happens with numbers, for example. So individuals might see colors, or they might actually hear certain sounds when they think of numbers. So with it, I don't know like how to word the exact definition. I should have looked this up.
Okay.
But basically there is an atypical association, sensory association with one sense, where another sense will be felt in an individual. So for me, it's the sound. Some sounds change the way that food tastes. Even some colors, when I am in a restaurant or out eating anywhere, for some reason, certain colors and textures will also change the way that food tastes, and I'll actually feel sick to my stomach, and I have to stop eating my food, or I have to, just look straight down at my plate and not look at anybody, because I'm already starting to feel that discomfort. And so oftentimes that can affect me socially, because if individuals don't know about me, they'll think that I'm just being antisocial, or I'm just being rude or ignoring them. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to enjoy my meal. Just give me 1 second. I'll get back to our discussion in just a moment. But here at home, for example, we have a dog named Miso. Totally by accident that her name is Miso. We named her Miso, and then I didn't get my, like miso soup. And then I didn't get my misophonia diagnosis until like a few days later after we got her. And I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. So whenever she's sitting here slurping while I'm eating, I'll be covering my ears, because I don't want it to change the way the food tastes. So I have to wait till she's done, and then I'll start eating again. But yeah, the fact that her name's Miso, and then that reaction happens, I think is just that's my meme for the day. And then I'm losing my train of thought though, so maybe if you wanted to continue.
Yeah, I do apologize. I was fascinated. So
No
we were
worries.
talking about some of the challenging things that you face as you were growing up,
Yes.
and more recently we
Yes.
touched on sensory,
Yes.
social
Very
challenges,
good.
and food being one of them.
Yes.
And it was around food when I wanted the elaboration of your misophonia and your
Yes.
experience with
Oh,
it.
yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, and then textures, clothing textures are a big thing. Tags drive me crazy. They still drive me crazy. So thank goodness for the tagless clothes that came about, 10, 15 years ago. But as a child, one parent, so my parents divorced when I was very young, but one parent would make me wear clothes that I did not want to wear. They were itchy, they were very, very distracting, and sometimes painful, to the point where I would scratch so hard I would just be raw red. And they would ask, where did this come from? Or, are you scratching? Stop scratching, for example. And I think even one point on my legs, there's the kiddo. One point on the back of my knees, I actually got a reaction, like a bad reaction, because I was itching so much. And I think it was because of the pants. I was wearing jeans. I didn't like wearing jeans. And they started itching me a lot. And so I ended up over scratching. And then I think it got infected, and there's a whole issue happened. I actually ended up having to go to the hospital because it was that bad. So textures are a big thing with me. And then growing up as a kid, my other parents recognized that I would not wear certain clothes. I just absolutely refused to. And so they got me bike shorts, like cotton bike shorts, to wear underneath all of my jean shorts that they had bought. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so much better, because I don't have to feel anything. And it was just that minor gesture that meant the world, sensory wise. And it's things like that parents can do that, if they're paying attention to their kids, or, their kids are saying, hey, I don't like these clothes. It's minor things like that I advocate for, that it may not take, a doctor to say, hey, do this, do this, do this. Here's a checklist here. But just, taking note of what your kids tend to be aversive to, and trying to make those minor adjustments, because it doesn't take a prescription to do that. It just takes a little bit of engagement, and all of a sudden their behavior changes, and my behavior changed. I was not complaining so much. I was not so tired. And I wasn't so depressed or moody as a kid, because of that simple change. So that's something that I definitely continue to advocate for, like for parents who are just having a difficult time. Charlie is, oh, he's got so many things that Patrick and I are just like, between Patrick's type 1 diabetes and my sensory and my issues, and then Charlie's, his house is a whole lot of fun every day.
Well, that smoothly transitions to the next question that I have about for you to tell us about what it's like being a parent to an autistic child. Now, we've got 2 sons we've mentioned, Oliver and Charlie. Is it just one? And would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Yeah, so mostly Charlie right now.
Yeah.
Oliver, we will see.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like me,
Yeah.
where it's, you just have to kind of keep an eye on things, and may not necessarily like take many resources or I guess many medical teams for him. So we will see on that. But with Charlie, it comes through, he's going through another growth spurt right now.
Wow.
And with this growth spurt, we're noticing that he's becoming more verbal in expressing the types of clothes that he wants to wear, the types of shoes that he wants to wear. His hair, he does not want us to cut his hair because he likes to twirl it. And that's one of his stims. Loves it. He will not let us cut his hair. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll just trim it so that it's not so tangly. But we're like, that's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. His food preferences. He has had severe food aversions since he was a baby, which when he was roughly 2.5 years old, is when we started his assessments in regards to like speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. And they said, we're not sure yet, but we have to see how he is in school and how he is in social settings in order to see if he is autistic. But he does have sensory issues for sure. He's got severe food aversions where he will only eat crunchy foods. And right now he's eating 5 things. It's usually 5 or 6. I can count them on one hand. And it's so funny because when we enrolled him at his daycare, they were like, oh, what types of foods does he eat? And I'm like, well, he eats about 5 or 6. And they're like, okay, so he eats 5 or 6 times a day. And I said, no. He eats literally 5 or 6 foods. And it's a type of cracker. It's a type of bread, like 5 or 6 actual things, not food groups, but actual food. One type of cereal, one type of granola bar. That is all he eats. Everything else is just sensory wise, it's terrifying for him. If it's cold, if it's mushy or squishy, will not eat it. He tenses up and he's like, no. It's absolutely terrified. So as a result of that, he's always been on the lower end of the percentile range for height as well as weight. And we got him assessed because in his early toddler years, he was actually getting lower, like 1 percentile, and getting more and more, not malnourished, but heading that direction, no matter what we were doing to try to feed him. So we ended up getting him assessed, and they were like, okay, well, the food aversions are what we have to work on. Sorry if you can hear him. he's in
no,
the
it's fine. No, it's absolutely fine. I think the audio is great. Yeah.
So it was frustrating for us because we were very concerned actually about his physical health. And the doctor was like, at this point, because it's such a pivotal time in the lifespan, where between 0 and 5 is where all of the growth is happening, we ended up giving him multivitamins, stronger multivitamins, to at least feed that. Hey, Charlie. Just one moment, everybody. Do you mind taking that upstairs? Your egg? Yeah. Do you mind? He's staring at me. So I'm sorry about that, everybody.
No need to apologize. This is what we love during our interviews. We have the various family members, pets, kids, husbands, wives, everyone pops in every now and then, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, he's stuck in a pattern right now of the throwing the egg up and down the stairs, up and down the stairs. And speaking of throwing, that is another thing. Hey, Charlie, can you take that upstairs, please? Because I can't hear. Do you mind? Can you take that upstairs, please? Thank you. Take that upstairs. Okay. Uh-oh. Take that upstairs, please. Uh-oh. So what he's doing now is something that I've also briefly talked about in the live feed that I did on Instagram when we were all at home. And that's in regards to oppositional defiant disorder, I think that's what it's called, ODD, and then the PDA, which we think he exhibits regularly, which is what he was doing just now, because he gets so focused on a task that he's got to keep doing it and got to keep doing it. And he has to do it a certain way that when you approach him and you say, hey, you know what, can we take this and can we relocate it or can we change just one minor thing about it? He's like, no, I can't do any of that. It's not going to work. That's not what I'm doing. And I think Pete Warmby, who is also out of London, I think, he is a professor, I believe, and he also advocates for. Oh, are you still there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
there's a bit of a lag.
Right.
Yeah.
There was. Yes.
Yeah. I can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Okay. He actually discusses this and he says, you know, if you tell me to do something out of nowhere, I'm immediately going to say no in defiance. And that's because his brain's not given the opportunity to process that and to process that change. And that goes a lot with autistics where change can be very anxiety inducing. And we go into almost like into a survival mode where we're like, no, what is going on? I can't process this right now. So we think that with Charlie, that's what happens with him. And although we have worked on timers and we've worked on slowly making changes for him from one task to another, it seems like we make strides with some tasks in some areas. And then when it comes to more complex tasks and more complex routines that we have to do each day, he's like, no, I'm not changing it. I don't want to do it because I'm happy doing what I'm doing right now. So food aversions affecting his actual physical health, major, as well as behavior, and those traits as well. Communication, he does take things very, very literally. And these are things that at his age, kids tend to do. If I haven't mentioned, he's going to be 6 in a couple of weeks. And kids at this age do tend to take things very literally, which is why they go through the why phase and they start asking why, what's this, why. They start asking more questions because their brains, the cognitive growth is happening at such a rapid rate. And the maturity levels are growing at such a rapid rate that now they're able to understand more complex ideas. And so with him, however, he can understand these complex ideas, but he still takes a single word very literally. I still take words very literally. There are a group of individuals at work who they like to use the word crying to, I think, represent complaining. they'll say, oh, you know, they're crying about it. But every time they say that, I literally see and think they're
Yes.
crying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'll ask them, oh, are they okay? And they're like, no, no, no. And I'm like, oh, I did it again. So it's kind of like the running joke with everybody. Like, I laugh at myself all the time. They laugh at these miscommunications because all of these individuals, English is not their first language. So communication is always super fun at work because there's a lot of idioms that I don't understand that they use. And there's idioms that they use that I don't think they're using in the actual American cultural context that they're supposed to use. So it's like, I do not think it means what they think it means. And I do not think it means what I think they think it means. So there's always confusion going on. Clarification and communication is a high priority in our household. It's actually one of the things that we decided to make a priority through therapy, both me and my husband, is learning communication and even learning, hey, even learning that I can't tell you what is going on right now, so therefore I just need a break. Even that is communication in and of itself. So that's something that I think is just going to be lifelong. And oftentimes that can actually be a setback in the workplace for some individuals, unless you explain to individuals, hey, I'm actually autistic, and sometimes I tend to things or I tend to ramble. So if I'm rambling, feel free to let me know, because that happens, because I cannot read whether or not you understand what I'm saying. I need like a very direct official response. Yes, I understand. No, I do not. Otherwise, I'll just keep going until you tell me to stop.
That's wonderful. I think you've inadvertently answered one of the questions that I had about some of the personality traits of your son, Charlie. And thank you for answering that. With the wealth of knowledge and experience you've acquired, and I know earlier you said one of the reasons you created your channel was so that you could gather your thoughts. Yes. Forgive me if I'm not quoting you correctly, but to backtrack, what was it that made you set out to create the YouTube channel, and how have you been actively raising awareness and understanding when it comes to autism?
Yes. So a part of that with my communication, over the past few years, I think I've been wanting to be creative again. Yeah. As a result of divorce and just how long it takes to recover from that, and coming out of toxic relationships, and abuse at times as well, I really saw myself as being suppressed and oppressed, like myself, not like the term, not like the one word myself, but my space self. So the self of me was being suppressed in many ways. And I wanted to be creative again. And I wanted to, I guess, come out and say hello to the world. I wanted to interact with the world in a way that I could without having to interact in the neurotypical way, because that's what I had been doing my entire life up until then. I didn't go to parties much when I was younger. I was not the type of person to go to people's houses and go to parties and go to these, huge social situations like that. I was the one who, I would go to dances with my friends. That was always nice because you were dancing. I had no idea that my continual dancing, nonstop, I'd get home from school, I'd go up into my room, I'd crank my stereo with the windows open. The neighbors knew when I was home, okay? And I would dance in my room for hours and hours and hours. And I always felt the need to have to move. And so I just made it rhythmic. Rhythm was always something that's always been my lifeblood, always. And had no idea that that was also a part of autism. So I would go to dances with my friends, and that was because it gave me the chance to move and to stim, basically, as they would call it nowadays. So otherwise, though, I was not very social in that way. I had my small group of friends, that was it. Or I was by myself, or I was with my boyfriend. Now I was working 3 jobs when I was in high school as well. So when I wasn't working, that's what I was usually doing. I was usually in my car as well, going for long drives, constantly moving. Movement and rhythm is just something that my body needs in order to regulate itself. So I found that, what was the question again?
The question was about,
Here we go.
well, the question was about the creation of your YouTube channel.
There we go.
And how
There we
you've
go.
been raising awareness. Yeah.
Yes. So that's the brain in action, everybody. I'm gonna cross that third wall there, or the fourth wall, I think it's called in film. So yeah. So as a result of that, I wanted to be social without being social. I find that I can do very, very well with online interaction because it's not so overwhelming for me. I don't feel like I am necessarily violating any cultural norms or mores or taboos if I were to be in a large group of people in person trying to have the same discussions that I have online. I also think that my existence and my being is so focused on the doing and the action that having discussion and small talk is not very important to me. I have another word for it, but I don't want to be rude. So it's not very important to me because I'm so focused on the action and the doing. Now, you talk about a topic that I am interested in, I will go on and on and on because most of the time it has to do with the actions that I am taking in this era. So starting the channel gave me a way to be able to participate with others and to showcase myself and to still be a person in the world without having to go into the scary parts of the world to me that would ultimately just make me go back home. It's also a way for, I think, for me to show other individuals who feel trapped in their homes and feel like they are trapped inside all the time because maybe they don't have the inspiration yet, or the idea hasn't come to them yet as to how they can exist out in the world being autistic, and still be able to have fun and still be able to take part in their interests, and to not have to worry about the anxiety, the social anxiety, or just sometimes the hatred that's out there, and the discrimination that is out there. What are some things that you can do to participate in the world without feeling attacked or feeling scared about it? And so most of my channel is going to be either the mouse and those theme parks and how I adjust, how I make adjustments for myself to be able to go to those places, because a lot of people think, well, isn't that the complete opposite of what you're saying? It is. I make a lot of adjustments. There's planning and there's timing, even down to my work schedule. My work schedule is so that I don't have to be around the crowds on weekends. It's done that way on purpose. So that's how far reaching it can be to get those accommodations and to try to be able to participate in the world, but at the same time, like, hey, I don't want to stress myself out and feel like I need to be debilitated after the day is done because I want to participate in something that the rest of the world wants to do, but I have specific needs. So I'm going to make those adjustments. And I really hope that when I request them, that individuals will be respectful of it. And when they are not, or when they don't understand, or, you know, if there's hatred that comes out as a result of a fear, you know, their fear, or of a misunderstanding, if hatred is the first thing that comes out, that's one of those situations where I just turn off and I cut off and I say, nope, not doing that. And because I just have too much that I have to contend with at that point. So my channel is very much going to be a place for inclusivity, a place to hold respectful as well as, I guess, like intelligent discussion and dialogue, I think. And I don't mean intelligent as in, oh, you have to have a certain IQ to hold dialogue with the show, or, you know, with even my Twitter feed. My Twitter is where I usually hold all my discussions and interact with everybody on that sense. But what I do mean is, like, if there is something that someone does not understand, if there are hateful comments, my YouTube channel is going to immediately just delete them or not even show them. That's the way I have it set up. But I am willing to have discussion with individuals who may have a differing of opinion or a differing of belief, so long as it's respectful and so long as there is a mutual understanding happening. And I hope that the show, when they watch the episodes and they see that I'm outside, you know, and I'm out doing things. Yes, I am. But usually if I'm outdoors at a certain time. I'm outdoors away from all the people. I'm outdoors more often and around greenery more often for a reason. And that is because it helps me rebalance myself and to come to a homeostasis where I am calm again, and where I'm not so, you know, just anxiety and my thoughts are going a million different directions. That's where I go to neutralize everything and to kind of reset and get ready for the rest of the week. And that's where our other food channel, we haven't posted anything on that for a long time because of the pandemic, but on that channel we did a lot of foraging in Oregon. We were outside very frequently because of all of the stress. I would just go for a hike amongst the trees in the forest, and that's what I would do. So that's one of the things that may not seem like it's something having to do with autism. It may just be like, oh, you know what, that's their favorite thing. And there were some days where I'm like, I really got to find a way to get outside and go for a hike and take some time in my shinrin-yoku, which that's the Japanese term for forest bathing. That's what I would do. My dog is now playing here. I'm going to be distracted. And I would, you know, just like make myself make time in the day to say, look, I'm going to go out for, even if it's just 15 minutes, and just take a deep breath and then reset and then go back home and go back to my day. So I do hope that people enjoy that with the show. I hope that they laugh. I think I'm funny. I think I'm pretty funny sometimes. I hope that, you know, they like going on the adventures with us and seeing what life is like here. I'm not always going to post a top 5 things autistic people like to eat. That's not what my channel is at all, actually. I just like to convey life, being autistic and living life. I don't think that for me it's necessary to be so obvious with being autistic, because I just think that the YouTube market is too saturated with that right now. I just want to be an autistic, just living life. And so that's what people are going to find on the Awesome with Autism show. They may find some like tips and tricks on there, and certain things that I might post on the bottom, like, hey, you see Charlie saying this over and over again, that's echolalia, that's what that is. Just like a quick tidbit, but I may not make it necessarily an entire episode. So.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, it's definitely funny, definitely entertaining and informative too. I mean, when we reached out to you, we really wanted to interview and get your thoughts on things, and it's been an absolute pleasure so far. No, you've touched on some sensory sensitivity issues that you've faced, your son too, and also how it's dealt with. Us as a team at Ai4Autism, we're currently raising awareness to build a tool to help people with sensory sensitivity issues and help identify what triggers them. Would you say a tool like this would have helped you, Charlie, or anyone else in the autistic community? And what are your thoughts on this?
I think so. I think I'd love to know more about it, because AI was something that I was just dabbling in last year during the pandemic and reading a few books on it. But in regards to sensory processing and alexithymia or interoception, for example, that's something that I'm interested to see happen, because for many autistics with those interoceptive issues and alexithymia, something may be happening to us, but it's the why that we can't identify. And so having a tool, an AI tool to, I guess, identify a trigger would be helpful, would be a great first step. And then I think developing it, the reasoning would be interesting to see, and just the massive data collection that would be needed for that, because the reasoning for some of the triggers for us is definitely going to be different than a baseline, a neurotypical baseline, for example, or a placebo. So having to map out a neural response and a neurological association between a sensory trigger and then somebody being able to identify that trigger would be very interesting, considering that is usually the lack of being able to identify is an issue. And then just reading some of the articles that are coming out on the autistic brain and how there may actually be more neurons, like an overload of neurons in the autistic brain, would be interesting for the AI to have to cipher and to have to really work through, because that's a lot of data to have to work through. So I'd definitely be interested.
I also want to add, I want to thank you very much for having taken the time you've definitely done a lot of homework, and the way you spoke here and you demonstrate you have a lot of understanding on the subject. So that's really, really good to know. I mean, thank you so much, Niki, for sharing your thoughts on this. We're approaching the end of the interview, and I'd like to thank you again, Niki. Is there one message you would like to send out to our audience about autism and what it's like to be on and have children who are autistic?
In regards to autism, I would have to say to not be fearful.
Not be fearful.
And to see this as just this, I see life as an adventure and as an exploration.
Yeah.
And not like in a bad way, not like, oh, it's a puzzle to be solved, for example. I just see autism as fascinating. But at the same time, what I would say, especially to the younger generation, because there's a huge movement going on. And obviously, you know, in your 20s, in those younger years, that is when that drive tends to happen. When you get motivated, your philanthropic ways and humanitarian traits come out because you're learning so much. That's when the brain cognitively is understanding the world and its concepts at a much broader level, and it's able to take in massive amounts of information and process that. And so what I would say to the younger generation is to who are autistic is to don't forget to live your life. It's great to advocate and to be proactive in the autistic realm, but don't forget to live your life as an autistic person. Live your life. Sometimes I think that obsession can actually lead to more confusion, and it can lead to more emotional states of mind that can be debilitating and almost can lead you to forget about what's out there for you. And so to that, go out and explore as an autistic. Don't forget to go out and explore, not just online, but go out and explore. And for parents who have autistic children, again, it's an adventure. It's hard. It's hard. It's tiring. But there's a lot of comedy in it. There's tragedy and comedy. You know, going back to the classics of tragedy and comedy, which one will you choose? It's your choice. And I choose comedy, and I hope that others would choose comedy as well. Not that tragedy isn't necessary or needed. You definitely need tragedy as well. But if you dwell on the tragedy, then you're missing out on the comedy. So don't forget that.
That was truly touching. Niki, thank you so much for this truly amazing interview. It's been insightful, it's been entertaining. Thank you. And how can our audience find out more about you and the work you do? And any links you mentioned will be shared at the bottom of the video when it goes live. And yeah, how can our audience find you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, as well as YouTube. The best place to go, honestly, would be YouTube. And you can finally find me at the Awesome With Autism Show. It's the first thing that pops up if you go in the YouTube search. And in the description to all of my videos are all of the links, because the Awesome With Autism Show, it's the full title on Instagram, but like on Twitter, for example, I had to hyphenate it because it's too long. So if you just go to the YouTube channel and go to the description, you'll see all the links for all of my social media. And yeah, come hang out, come say hi. Love it if you like and subscribe and watch the show. Love to say hi to everybody.
Fantastic. Niki, thank you once again. And it's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you. And for everyone at home, thank you all for taking the time and for listening. If you liked what you saw and you want to share your story, get in touch with us. We want to put your voice out there in the world. Niki, thank you so much. Everyone at home,
Thank you very much.
all, and bye for now.